Hey class, we're going to start our physics unit on motions and forces. The world around us is full of forces and motions, from speeding cars to the blood inside our body, to the gust of wind, and even a game of bowling. So what is a force? A force is a push or a pull. So for example, when wind pushes a sailboat through the water, it is exerting a force. When gravity pulls an apple towards the ground, that is a force as well. So when we're kicking a soccer ball, when the foot kicks the ball, it applies a force. The force of the kick makes the ball go from standing still to moving away. Forces can make things move, change their speed, change their direction, and even change their shape. So for example, when we are bouncing a basketball, as the ball strikes the ground pushes against it. The force of this push causes the ball to change direction and bounce up again. The force exerted by the ground causes the ball to move in a new direction. So if you drop a pencil, it falls to the floor. It is being pulled down by an invisible force called gravity. All objects have their own gravity. Heavier objects tend to pull more strongly than smaller objects. The heaviest object close to us is Earth, so everything is being pulled towards it. Without gravity, everything on Earth would fly into space. So when we are throwing a baseball, the force of gravity pulls the baseball down towards the ground. The ground does not need to be touching the baseball to apply the force. Here we see the baseball accelerating as it's being thrown up. Once the ball reaches its maximum height, the ball accelerates down. The baseball goes down because gravity is pulling it towards the ground. The length of a line between the start and end of a motion is the distance traveled. The time you take to travel this distance depends on your speed. A force can make something go from standing still to moving slowly. This is called acceleration. Here we see him increase in acceleration as he starts to skate, but his acceleration decreases as time goes on. There are only two ways to accelerate. It's either to change your speed or change your direction, or change both. That feeling you get when you're sitting in a plane during takeoff, or slamming on the brakes in a car, or turning a corner at a high speed in a go-kart, are all situations where you are accelerating. If you are not changing your speed and you're not changing your direction, then you simply cannot be accelerating. You can think about it this way. In a car, you could accelerate by hitting the gas or the brakes, either of which would cause a change in speed. But you could also use the steering wheel to turn, which would change your direction of motion. Any of these would be considered an acceleration since they change velocity. Two forces slide against each other. A force called friction makes them stick together. Smooth surfaces like glass and ice are easy to slide over. They create very little friction. Rough surfaces like rocks and sand create more friction. It's harder to move things when there's a lot of friction holding them back. But if there were no friction, people would just slip and slide when they take a step. Here we see very little friction holding him back, so he is able to run full speed. Sand creates a lot of friction compared to a street, so it is harder to run full speed on sand. Without forces, nothing would ever move and nothing would happen. The earth would be silent and still. Isaac Newton developed 3 simple laws that explains what happens when forces make things move. Newton's first law simply states that something cannot start or stop or change directions all by themselves. It takes an outside force acting on it to cause such a change. I'm going to demonstrate Newton's first law, which states that an object in motion will stay in motion unless an outside force acts upon it. So I'm going to show that by putting this on top of my car, and while I'm driving, I'm going to brake to show that this item will continue staying in motion. When traveling on a bus or a car or any vehicle, have you noticed how you continue to move forward when it stops? Well, you experience inertia. When a vehicle stops, you tend to jerk forward before coming to a complete stop. In the same way, you will jerk backwards when the vehicle begins to move. This occurs because of Newton's first law of motion, which means objects tend to keep doing what they're doing unless disturbed. Newton's second law of motion describes what happens to a massive body that is acted upon by external forces. It states that the force acting on an object is equal to the mass of the object times its acceleration. F equals ma. Here, the mass of the older girl is more, so therefore the little girl has to apply more force to move her. Here we see the opposite. The mass of the little girl is less, so therefore the older girl applies a less force in order to move her. Here I only have to apply a little bit of force to get the go-kart to accelerate because a go-kart has less mass. I need to apply more force to move a car because a car has more mass than a go-kart. Newton's third law of motion states that first forces occur in pairs. So when one body pushes against another, that second body will push back as hard. Okay, so when we're thinking about Newton's third law of motion, think about a time when you sit on a chair. Okay, so when you're sitting on a chair, your butt to the chair exerts a downward force. But the chair to your butt exerts a upward force. So these forces are balanced, so therefore you stay on the chair and you don't collapse down. So now you know the physics behind sitting on a chair and why you don't fall down when you sit on a chair. So I have a question for you. Why do you think when I push a wall, I don't fall down? And the reason is because of Newton's third law of motion. So when I push a wall, I'm exerting a force onto the wall, but the wall is also exerting a force to me. So these two forces are balancing each other, therefore I don't fall down.